She boarded the flight like she wanted to disappear into the background. Quiet, composed, unnoticed. To everyone around her, she looked like just another passenger who didn't belong anywhere near the cockpit. But when a sudden emergency sent fear racing through the cabin, the captain overheard something that made his blood run cold. The woman everyone had silently judged wasn't talking to herself. She was calmly identifying every move of nearby F-18 fighter jets with the confidence of someone who had flown beside them. In a single moment, every assumption about her collapsed. But why had a decorated combat pilot been treated like she didn't belong in the first place, and what happened next left an entire flight in stunned silence. Maya Carter had spent most of her life proving herself in places where people expected her to fail. Long before anyone saw her sitting quietly in seat 14A, she had flown through hostile skies, completed missions that demanded absolute precision, and earned the respect of military crews who trusted her with their lives. Her service record was filled with commendations that few pilots would ever achieve. Yet none of those accomplishments could be seen beneath a simple navy jacket, a small travel bag, and the calm expression she carried through the airport that morning. After leaving active military service, Maya had chosen a quieter life. She rarely spoke about her career, rarely wore medals, and never felt the need to announce who she had been. She believed respect should come from character, not from titles or uniforms. That belief had served her well in some places. In others, it only made her invisible. The flight she boarded that afternoon was supposed to be nothing more than another trip across the country. She had accepted an invitation to mentor young aviation students at a military aviation conference, hoping to encourage the next generation of pilots who might someday wear the same wings she once wore with pride. She looked forward to a peaceful flight, a chance to review her notes, and perhaps enjoy a few quiet hours before landing. Around her, the airport buzzed with the familiar rhythm of departures. Families hugged goodbye, business travelers hurried toward their gates, and airline employees guided passengers through another busy day. Maya blended effortlessly into the crowd. Most people never looked at her twice, but a few did. Some passengers glanced at her before quickly looking away. Others held their gaze just a little too long, quietly forming opinions based on nothing more than appearance. Maya had learned to recognize those looks years ago. They were subtle, often silent, but painfully familiar. She had encountered them at airports, hotels, restaurants, and even during her military career. They rarely came with words anymore. They came with hesitation, doubt, and assumptions that she didn't belong where she was. She had stopped reacting. Experience had taught her that challenging every judgment only exhausted the person being judged. As boarding began, Maya calmly found her assigned seat near the front of the cabin. She placed her small bag beneath the seat, buckled her belt, and opened a notebook filled with handwritten aviation diagrams and flight procedures. To anyone who noticed, it might have looked like an unusual hobby. In reality, reviewing aircraft systems had become second nature after thousands of hours in military cockpits. Not everyone interpreted it that way. A nearby passenger watched her with visible skepticism before quietly whispering something to another traveler. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to suspicion. Within moments, a flight attendant noticed the exchange and glanced toward Maya, offering a polite smile that didn't quite hide a growing sense of concern. Nothing had happened. No rules had been broken. No disturbance had been caused. Yet the atmosphere around Maya had begun to change. Farther ahead, inside the cockpit, the captain and first officer completed their routine preparations, completely unaware that silent assumptions were already spreading through the cabin. They had no idea that before the flight was over, the quiet woman everyone underestimated would become the one person standing between panic and survival. And when an unexpected emergency unfolded high above the clouds, those first impressions would come back to haunt everyone who had made them. The aircraft climbed smoothly above the clouds, and for a while, everything appeared routine. Passengers settled into their seats, flight attendants moved calmly through the aisle, and the steady hum of the engines created the familiar silence that fills thousands of flights every day. Maya remained exactly as she had been since boarding, quiet, focused, and almost invisible. But invisibility had never protected her from prejudice. The whispers that had started during boarding refused to disappear. A few passengers continued glancing toward her notebook, where sketches of fighter formations, emergency procedures, and aircraft systems covered every page. None of them recognized the handwriting of someone who had spent years planning combat missions. Instead, they saw something they didn't understand, and misunderstanding quickly became suspicion. One concerned passenger quietly alerted a flight attendant, suggesting that the woman in seat 14A was behaving strangely. The report contained no facts, only assumptions. She was studying unusual diagrams. She looked too calm. She didn't seem like someone who belonged in first class. Within minutes, another crew member was discreetly watching Maya from the galley. She noticed. She always noticed. Years of military flying had trained her to recognize surveillance long before most people realized they were being watched. Yet instead of confronting anyone, she lowered her eyes and continued reading, knowing from painful experience that defending herself before an accusation was made often made matters worse. The attention only grew. Several passengers had already reached the same conclusion without speaking to her once. Some quietly gathered their belongings farther away. Others exchanged worried expressions whenever they passed her row. Nobody asked who she was. Nobody asked what she had done. Their minds had already filled in the blanks. It wasn't the first time. Throughout her career, Maya had entered briefing rooms where people assumed she was administrative staff instead of the mission commander. She had walked onto military airfields where contractors asked if she was lost while junior pilots saluted the officers standing behind her. Even after earning decorations for extraordinary service, she found herself proving the same thing over and over, that competence could not be judged by appearance. She had hoped those days were behind her. She was wrong. A flight attendant finally approached with practiced professionalism, politely asking whether everything was all right. Maya answered with calm confidence, explaining that she was reviewing aviation material before speaking at an upcoming conference. The explanation should have ended the concern. Instead, it deepened it. The attendant smiled politely but left unconvinced. To several nearby passengers, the idea that the quiet black woman knew advanced military aviation sounded less believable than the suspicion already forming in their minds. Moments later, the cockpit received a brief message from the cabin crew. Nothing serious, only a request to remain aware of a passenger displaying unusual aviation behavior. The captain barely thought about it. Experienced crews received strange reports all the time. Then everything changed. Without warning, the aircraft shuddered violently. A sharp vibration echoed through the cabin as the seatbelt signs illuminated with a loud chime. Several passengers gasped. Drinks splashed onto tray tables. Overhead bins rattled as the airplane rolled unexpectedly before leveling again. The calm atmosphere vanished. Inside the cockpit, warning tones demanded immediate attention. Outside, weather wasn't the problem. Neither was turbulence. Something else had entered the airspace. The captain's workload increased dramatically as new information arrived from air traffic control. Nearby military aircraft were operating under rapidly changing conditions, forcing civilian traffic into unexpected routing. Every decision suddenly mattered. Most passengers had no idea what was happening. Maya did. She slowly lifted her head toward the window, studying the sky with the instincts of someone who had spent thousands of hours reading situations exactly like this. Her breathing never changed. Her expression remained steady while anxiety spread through the cabin. Then she quietly began identifying details almost no civilian should have recognized. The rhythm of distant engines, the formation pattern, the spacing, the altitude changes. She wasn't guessing. She knew. A nearby passenger overheard her calmly describing the movements of F-18s before anyone else even realized military jets were nearby. Within seconds, word spread through several rows that the suspicious woman was talking about fighter aircraft. Fear replaced suspicion. Someone whispered that she might be dangerous. Someone else insisted the crew needed to stop her immediately. Another passenger demanded that the captain be informed. No one realized that the woman they feared was the only person on board who truly understood what was unfolding outside the aircraft. And in the cockpit, a single transmission was about to make the captain remember a legendary combat call sign he hadn't heard in years. Inside the cockpit, alarms continued demanding immediate attention as air traffic control issued rapid-fire updates. A temporary military operation had altered the airspace with almost no warning, forcing multiple civilian aircraft into a narrow corridor while several F-18s maneuvered nearby under strict operational protocols. Every instruction had to be interpreted perfectly. Every second mattered. The captain had flown for nearly 3 decades, yet even he felt the pressure building. Then another warning appeared. One of the aircraft's navigation systems began producing conflicting information. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but in already congested airspace, uncertainty could quickly become danger. The first officer worked through emergency procedures while the captain tried to establish clear communication with controllers. The cockpit had become a race against time. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere was unraveling. Passengers gripped their armrests. Children began crying. Oxygen masks had not deployed, but fear spread faster than any announcement could calm it. Flight attendants moved quickly through the aisle, trying to reassure everyone while hiding the concern growing on their own faces. Then one of them recognized something unusual. Maya wasn't frightened. She wasn't frozen. She was carefully watching the aircraft's movements, almost as if she could anticipate every correction before it happened. The same woman who had been viewed with suspicion now looked remarkably composed. The flight attendant hurried to the cockpit. "There is a passenger," she explained. "She keeps identifying the fighter jets before anyone else sees them. She says they're changing formation." The captain barely looked up until he heard the next sentence. "She claims she used to fly them." His hands stopped moving. For a brief moment, an old memory surfaced. Years earlier, during a multinational military exercise, there had been one pilot whose calm voice had become legendary over the radio. While others panicked under impossible conditions, that pilot spoke with absolute confidence, guiding entire formations through dangerous situations that should have ended in disaster. There had been a call sign everyone remembered: Ghost. Almost no one knew the pilot's real name, only the call sign. The captain turned toward the cabin through the open cockpit door. His eyes landed on Maya. Something about her posture, something about the calm concentration on her face, something he couldn't ignore. He walked into the aisle. Passengers watched in complete silence, assuming the captain was finally confronting the woman many had already judged. Instead, he asked one quiet question: "Were you, Ghost?" Maya slowly looked up. She nodded once. Nothing more. The captain's expression changed instantly. Years of authority disappeared beneath genuine respect. Without hesitation, he extended his hand before the entire cabin. "I flew support missions beside your squadron." The words echoed through the silent aircraft. "You saved my crew." Every whisper vanished. Every suspicious glance disappeared. The passengers who had feared her only minutes earlier now stared in disbelief. The flight attendants who had quietly monitored her realized they had questioned one of the most experienced aviators they would ever meet. The captain immediately invited Maya into the cockpit, not to fly the aircraft, but because her experience with military airspace and tactical operations could help interpret the rapidly changing situation. Working alongside the crew, she calmly analyzed the fighter formations, anticipated routing adjustments, and confirmed the safest expectations based on procedures she had practiced countless times during her military career. Her voice never rose. Her hands never shook. While panic consumed the cabin, she brought clarity. Within minutes, the aircraft received updated routing, safely exited the restricted airspace, and continued toward its destination. The danger passed. But another truth remained impossible to ignore. The passengers had trusted fear before facts. They had believed appearance before achievement. They had doubted a hero because she didn't fit the image they expected. And as the aircraft began its descent, the silence inside that cabin felt heavier than anything the turbulence had ever caused. Everyone now faced the same uncomfortable question: how many extraordinary people are underestimated every single day, not because of what they've done, but because of what others assume when they first look at them? The aircraft landed without further incident. As the wheels touched the runway, a quiet wave of relief swept through the cabin. Moments earlier, fear had consumed everyone on board. Now, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence that follows an uncomfortable truth. Passengers slowly gathered their belongings, but almost no one rushed toward the exit. Their attention remained fixed on the woman they had barely noticed when the journey began. The same woman many had quietly questioned. The same woman some had feared. The same woman who had helped bring calm when panic threatened to overwhelm the flight. Before the cabin doors opened, the captain made one final announcement. His voice carried a sincerity that every passenger could hear. He thanked his crew for their professionalism. He thanked air traffic controllers for their coordination. Then he paused. Finally, he thanked Maya Carter. Without revealing classified details of her military career, he acknowledged her decades of service, her extraordinary aviation experience, and the calm judgment she had demonstrated when it mattered most. He admitted that the flight had benefited from her knowledge, and he encouraged every passenger to remember one simple lesson: the most qualified person in the room is not always the loudest. Sometimes, they are the one everyone overlooks. As passengers stepped into the terminal, several approached Maya with visible embarrassment. Some offered quiet apologies. Others simply lowered their eyes, unable to find the right words. She accepted every apology with the same grace she had carried throughout the flight. Not because the assumptions hadn't hurt, but because she understood something many of them were only beginning to learn. Prejudice often begins long before hateful words are spoken. It begins with silent assumptions. It begins with deciding who belongs before asking who they are. It begins with judging appearance instead of ability. For Maya, this flight was not an isolated experience. It was another chapter in a lifetime of having her her accomplishments questioned before they were discovered. She had experienced it in military academies, on airbases, in boardrooms, and now aboard a commercial flight. Every time, she was expected to prove herself before being given the same respect others received automatically. Yet she refused to let bitterness define her. Instead, she continued mentoring young aviators from every background, encouraging them to pursue excellence even when the world underestimated them. She reminded them that character is measured by actions, not by the opinions of strangers. In the weeks that followed, several passengers shared their experience publicly. They spoke not only about the emergency but about the assumptions they had made before knowing the truth. Some admitted they had mistaken confidence for suspicion simply because it came from someone who didn't match their expectations of what a decorated combat pilot should look like. Those reflections sparked conversations far beyond that single flight. Because this story was never just about an airplane. It was about how quickly people can create a story in their minds without knowing a single fact. It was about how stereotypes can quietly influence ordinary decisions, even among people who never believe they are being unfair. And it was about the hidden cost of those assumptions, not only to the people who endure them, but to everyone who loses the opportunity to recognize talent, wisdom, and courage because they judged too soon. There are countless people like Maya, veterans whose sacrifices go unnoticed, professionals whose expertise is questioned, leaders whose voices are doubted before they speak, heroes who are mistaken for outsiders simply because they don't fit someone else's expectations. Some eventually get the chance to prove everyone wrong. Many never do. That is why stories like this matter. Not because they ask us to feel guilty, but because they ask us to pause before making assumptions, to replace judgment with curiosity, to see individuals instead of stereotypes. The next extraordinary person you meet may not wear a uniform. They may not introduce themselves with titles or medals. They may simply take the seat beside you, quietly carrying a lifetime of courage that no one can see. The question is, will we recognize their humanity before we demand they prove their worth? If this story made you think, share it with someone else. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and remember, every assumption we challenge is one less barrier standing between prejudice and understanding. Sometimes, the strongest wings are the ones the world never expected to fly.